The evening started like any other in Maplewood Estates, a gated community where the lawns were always trimmed to perfection, and the HOA bylaws were enforced with an iron fist. Daniel Harper, a 52-year-old father of two, had just finished dinner with his wife, Susan, and their teenage daughter, Emily. He was settling into his recliner with a glass of iced tea when it happened. A sharp, searing pain shot through his chest. "Something's wrong," Daniel gasped, clutching his chest. His face was pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Susan's heart dropped. "Emily, call 911, she shouted as she knelt beside her husband. Emily grabbed the phone with trembling hands and relayed their address to the dispatcher. "Please hurry," Susan added desperately when she took over the call. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet night air. The ambulance sped toward the Harper home, its red and blue lights reflecting off the meticulously maintained street signs of Maplewood Estates. But as it reached the entrance gate to the community, it came to an abrupt halt. Standing at the gate was Karen Mitchell, president of the Maplewood Homeowners Association and self-appointed guardian of all things orderly. With her clipboard in hand and her signature scowl firmly in place, Karen stepped in front of the ambulance like a traffic cop who had just spotted a jaywalker. "Whoa there," Karen said as one of the paramedics stepped out of the vehicle. "You can't just drive in here." The paramedic blinked in disbelief. "Ma'am, this is an emergency. We need to get to a resident's house immediately." Karen held up her clipboard like it was a badge of authority. "I'm sorry, but Bylaw 18D clearly states that all non-resident vehicles must have prior authorization to enter the community." She pointed at a laminated copy of the rule attached to her clipboard for good measure. The paramedic's patience was already wearing thin. "This is life or death. We don't have time for this." Karen pursed her lips and shook her head. "Rules are rules," she said with an air of finality that only someone who truly enjoyed enforcing arbitrary rules could muster. "If I make an exception for you, then what's next? Delivery trucks barreling through here at all hours? Teenagers throwing parties in their parents' basements? I don't think so." Meanwhile, back at the Harper home, Daniel's condition was worsening by the second. His breathing was shallow now, his face ashen as Susan held his hand tightly. "Where are they?" she whispered to herself, glancing out the window for any sign of help. The flashing lights of the ambulance were visible in the distance, but they weren't moving closer. Susan grabbed her phone again and called 911 for an update. "Why aren't they here yet?" she demanded, her voice cracking under the weight of panic and frustration. "They're being delayed at your community gate," came the dispatcher's calm but apologetic reply. Susan's jaw dropped. "What do you mean delayed? My husband is dying." She slammed down the phone and turned to Emily. "Stay with your father," she said before storming out toward the gate. "At this point, let me ask you something. Have you ever had an HOA nightmare that made you want to pull your hair out? Maybe it wasn't life or death like this, or maybe it was. But we've all been there. Fined for leaving trash cans out too long or told your mailbox color doesn't match community standards. What would you do if someone you loved was on the line and bureaucracy stood in your way? Share your thoughts or stories below. I'd love to hear them. Back at the gate, tensions were rising by the second. Another paramedic tried reasoning with Karen, while his partner called for assistance from local law enforcement to force entry into the community. "Ma'am," he said through gritted teeth, "every second we waste here could mean life or death for someone inside." Karen crossed her arms over her chest and tilted her chin up defiantly. "And every second I waste explaining this to you means I'm not doing my job protecting this community from unauthorized access." The paramedic stared at her in disbelief before muttering under his breath and walking back toward the ambulance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was actually just 7 agonizing minutes, 7 minutes too long, a fire truck arrived on scene with tools to force open the gate manually. Karen protested loudly as firefighters used bolt cutters to snap through the lock. "This is property damage," she shrieked as sparks flew from the chain being cut. But no one was listening anymore. Not even her fellow HOA board members who had gathered nearby to watch in stunned silence. By the time paramedics finally reached Daniel Harper's home and loaded him into the ambulance, It was clear that precious time had been lost, time that Daniel didn't have to spare. As Susan watched them drive away with her husband inside, tears streaming down her face, she couldn't shake one thought. This wasn't just negligence. It was cruelty, and someone would have to answer for it. Mark Harper stood at the edge of the cemetery, his hands clenched into fists as the last shovelful of dirt was placed over his father's grave. The air was heavy with grief, and the low murmur of condolences from friends and family barely registered in his ears. He had always been a quiet, level-headed man, an estate planner by trade, someone who thrived on logic and order. But today, standing there in his black suit and tie, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Rage. The funeral had been hard enough. Watching his mother, Susan, clutch her chest as if her heart might break in two. Watching his younger sister, Emily, sob quietly into a crumpled tissue. But what pushed him over the edge was what happened later that night. As the family returned home to grieve in peace, they found a bright yellow notice taped to their front door. It was from the HOA. Violation notice. It read in bold letters, "Unauthorized parking for funeral guests." Below that was a fine, $250. Mark stared at the notice for a long moment, his jaw tightening. His mother's face crumpled as she read over his shoulder. "They fined us for Dad's funeral?" she whispered, her voice breaking. That was it. That was the moment Mark decided he wasn't going to let this go. The next morning, Mark sat at his kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee and his laptop open in front of him. He wasn't just an estate planner. He had a minor in property law from college, which he'd never really used professionally. But now it felt like fate had handed him a reason to dust off those old textbooks. He started with the HOA bylaws, which were conveniently available online thanks to Karen Mitchell's obsessive need to document every rule and regulation. He read through them line by line, highlighting anything that seemed remotely questionable. It didn't take long before he found something interesting. Bylaw 18D, the one Karen had cited to block the paramedics from entering the community. The bylaw stated that all non-resident vehicles required prior authorization to enter Maplewood Estates unless they were emergency vehicles responding to an active threat or fire. Mark frowned at the wording. An active threat or fire? What about medical emergencies? He dug deeper and found that this specific bylaw hadn't been updated in over 15 years. Despite state regulations requiring HOAs to review their rules every 5 years to ensure compliance with local laws. But that wasn't all. As Mark kept digging, he uncovered more troubling details about how the HOA operated under Karen's leadership. The gate system that delayed the paramedics? It lacked an emergency override feature, a direct violation of county safety ordinances. The community's liability insurance expired 6 months ago. And then there were the ADA violations. Several residents with disabilities had filed complaints about inaccessible sidewalks and ramps that were never addressed. Mark's anger simmered as he compiled his findings into a growing folder on his laptop. This wasn't just negligence, it was systemic failure. He decided to take things further. Over the next few days, Mark reached out to other residents in Maplewood Estates who had clashed with Karen and the HOA over the years. It didn't take long for him to find them. There was no shortage of people eager to share their horror stories. There was Tom Jenkins, a retired veteran who'd been fined $500 for having an American flag on his porch because it didn't meet approved dimensions. There was Linda Alvarez, a single mother who'd been threatened with eviction after her son left his bike on their front lawn overnight. And then there was George Miller, an elderly man whose oxygen delivery truck had been denied entry at the gate because it arrived 5 minutes after curfew. Each story painted a picture of an HOA that cared more about enforcing arbitrary rules than about the well-being of its residents. But perhaps the most damning evidence came from Denise Carter, a local attorney who specialized in taking down corrupt HOAs. Mark found her name through an online forum where disgruntled homeowners shared advice on fighting back against overreaching associations. Denise was sharp-tongued and no-nonsense, a woman who'd built her career on holding people like Karen Mitchell accountable. When Mark called her and explained what had happened to his father, she didn't hesitate. "This is bigger than just your dad," Denise said during their first meeting at her downtown office. What you're describing is a pattern of abuse and mismanagement that goes beyond negligence. We're talking about potential criminal liability here. Together, Mark and Denise began building their case against Karen and the HOA. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit on behalf of Daniel Harper's estate, arguing that Karen's actions directly contributed to his death by delaying emergency medical care. But they didn't stop there. They also filed complaints with local government agencies about the HOA's numerous code violations and demanded an independent audit of its finances. The more they dug, the worse it got. Emails obtained through discovery revealed that Karen had explicitly instructed other board members to enforce Bylaw 18D without exceptions, even in cases involving emergency services. One email read, "If we start making exceptions for ambulances today, what's next? Pizza delivery trucks tomorrow." Mark couldn't believe what he was reading. His father had died because Karen Mitchell cared more about controlling her little kingdom than about saving a life. As news of the lawsuit spread through Maplewood Estates and eventually made its way into local headlines, residents began rallying behind Mark and Denise. People who'd once been too afraid to speak out against Karen now came forward with their own stories of mistreatment and abuse. Karen tried to fight back, of course. She issued statements defending her actions as necessary for maintaining community order and accused Mark of trying to tear apart Maplewood Estates out of personal vendetta. But her words rang hollow as more evidence came to light. For Mark Harper, this wasn't just about getting justice for his father. It was about standing up for everyone who'd ever been steamrolled by petty power plays and bureaucratic nonsense masquerading as rules. And as he sat in Denise's office one evening reviewing their growing mountain of evidence against Karen and the HOA, he felt something he hadn't felt since his father passed away. Hope. It wouldn't bring Daniel Harper back, but maybe it could make sure no one else ever suffered like he did again. The lawsuit against Karen Mitchell and the Maplewood Estates HOA didn't just make waves. It created a tsunami. Within days of the filing, the local news station ran a story with the headline, "HOA blocks paramedics. Resident dies." The accompanying footage showed Daniel Harper's grieving family standing outside their home, with Mark Harper speaking directly to the camera. "This isn't just about my father," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is about a system that prioritizes power and control over human lives. It has to stop." The story spread like wildfire. Soon, it wasn't just local news covering it. Regional outlets picked it up, and social media exploded with outrage. People from all over the country shared their own horror stories about HOAs gone rogue. There were tales of fines for mailbox colors, threats over holiday decorations, and even one man who claimed his HOA tried to evict him for planting tomatoes in his backyard. But none of those stories carried the same weight as this one. A man had died because of an HOA's actions, or more accurately, inactions, and that struck a nerve with people everywhere. As the media frenzy grew, so did the pressure on Karen Mitchell. Reporters camped outside her house. Neighbors whispered behind her back, and even some of her staunchest supporters on the HOA board began to distance themselves from her. But Karen wasn't about to back down. In an interview with a local journalist, she defended her actions with the same smugness that had made her infamous in Maplewood Estates. "The rules exist for a reason," she said, sitting in her immaculately decorated living room. "If we start making exceptions, where does it end? Chaos. That's where it ends." Her words only fueled the fire. Comment sections lit up with angry responses, calling her everything from heartless to a dictator in pearls. Memes began circulating online. Karen's face photoshopped onto famous villains like Darth Vader and Cruella de Vil. One particularly popular meme featured her holding up a clipboard with the caption, "Your emergency is not my emergency." Meanwhile, Mark and Denise Carter were hard at work building their case. The wrongful death lawsuit was just the beginning. With every new piece of evidence they uncovered, their argument against Karen and the HOA grew stronger. One of their most significant breakthroughs came when they obtained internal emails from Karen's time as HOA president. These emails painted a damning picture of her leadership style, if you could even call it that. In one email to the board members, Karen wrote, "We need to enforce these rules strictly. If we let one ambulance through without authorization, what's next? Pizza delivery trucks. Ice cream vans? It's a slippery slope. Another email revealed that Karen had explicitly instructed gate attendants not to prioritize emergency vehicles unless there was visible fire or smoke, an interpretation of Bylaw 18D that went far beyond its original intent. But it wasn't just emails that exposed Karen's reign of terror. As news of the lawsuit spread through Maplewood Estates, former HOA board members began coming forward with their own stories about what it was like working under her. "She ruled with an iron fist," said Tom Reynolds, who had served on the board for 2 years before resigning in frustration. "If you disagreed with her, she'd find a way to push you out. Whether it was through fines, public shaming at meetings, or just making your life miserable." Another former board member, Linda Alvarez, recounted how Karen had once fined a resident $1,000 for leaving their garage door open overnight, a mistake caused by a faulty remote control. "She didn't care about context," Linda said. "To her, rules were rules, no matter how ridiculous they were." These testimonials added fuel to an already raging firestorm of public opinion against Karen and the HOA. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from George Miller, an elderly resident who had lived in Maplewood Estates for over 20 years. George told reporters about an incident where his oxygen delivery truck was denied entry at the gate because it arrived 5 minutes after curfew. "I begged them to let it through," he said, tears welling up in his eyes as he recounted the story. "I told them I needed that oxygen to breathe, but they wouldn't listen." When asked who had made the decision to block the truck, George didn't hesitate: Karen Mitchell. As these stories piled up, it became clear that this wasn't just about one tragic incident. It was about a pattern of abuse and mismanagement that had plagued Maplewood Estates for years. Karen tried to fight back against the mounting criticism by issuing public statements through her attorney. In one particularly tone-deaf statement, she claimed that Mark Harper's lawsuit was an attack on community order and accused him of trying to tear apart Maplewood Estates out of personal vendetta. But her words fell on deaf ears. By now, Mark had become something of a folk hero, not just in Maplewood Estates but across the country. People saw him as a symbol of resistance against overreaching HOAs and petty bureaucrats who cared more about power than people. Mark didn't seek out this role. It wasn't in his nature to be in the spotlight, but he embraced it nonetheless. He gave interviews to reporters, spoke at town hall meetings about the dangers of unchecked HOA power, and even started an online petition calling for stricter regulations on HOAs nationwide. The petition quickly gained traction, amassing tens of thousands of signatures within weeks. People from all walks of life shared their stories in the comments section. Stories of unfair fines, arbitrary rules, and power-hungry HOA presidents who seemed more interested in playing dictator than serving their communities. Through it all, Mark remained focused on one goal: holding Karen Mitchell accountable for what happened to his father. And while he knew there was still a long road ahead, court dates to prepare for, depositions to give, he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. The suburban war had begun, and this time, it wasn't just about bylaws or fines or parking violations. It was about justice. Justice for Daniel Harper. Justice for everyone who'd ever been silenced by people like Karen Mitchell. And justice for every community that deserved better than what Maplewood Estates had become under her rule. Karen Mitchell's world began to unravel faster than she could say. Bylaw 18D. What started as a local lawsuit had spiraled into a full-blown investigation into her leadership of the Maplewood Estates HOA. The media attention, the damning testimonials from residents, and the relentless legal pressure from Mark Harper and Denise Carter had turned Karen's once iron grip on the community into a crumbling facade. The first blow came when the city council announced it was launching an official investigation into the HOA's operations. Mark and Denise had filed complaints with multiple agencies, citing everything from safety violations to financial mismanagement. And as it turned out, Karen's meticulous record-keeping, her pride and joy, was about to become her downfall. City inspectors descended on Maplewood Estates armed with clipboards and cameras, documenting every infraction they could find. The gate system that had delayed the paramedics? It was not only non-compliant with emergency access regulations, but also hadn't been inspected in over a decade. The sidewalks and ramps? They failed to meet ADA standards. leaving residents with disabilities effectively trapped in their own homes. And then there was the liability insurance or lack thereof. The HOA's policy had expired 6 months earlier, leaving the entire community exposed to potential lawsuits. When the city released its findings, it wasn't pretty. The HOA was cited for multiple violations, including negligence in maintaining safety protocols and failure to comply with state-mandated accessibility requirements. But what really caught everyone's attention was the financial audit. For years, Karen had insisted that every dime of HOA funds was accounted for, often using this claim to justify her aggressive enforcement of fines and fees. But when auditors reviewed the HOA's financial records, they found glaring discrepancies. Thousands of dollars were unaccounted for, and several payments had been made to vendors that didn't appear to exist. One particularly suspicious expense was a $5,000 payment labeled Community Beautification Project, which seemed to coincide with Karen's backyard renovation, a project that included a brand new koi pond and custom stonework. When confronted with these findings, Karen denied any wrongdoing. "These are baseless accusations," she told reporters outside her home, her voice trembling but defiant. "I have always acted in the best interest of this community." But her neighbors weren't buying it anymore. Once loyal supporters began turning against her as more evidence of her mismanagement came to light. Residents who had previously been too afraid to speak out now felt emboldened by Mark's lawsuit and the growing public scrutiny. One by one, members of the HOA board started resigning. First was Tom Reynolds, who left a scathing resignation letter taped to the clubhouse door. "I can no longer be part of an organization that prioritizes power over people." Then came Linda Alvarez, who tearfully apologized during a community meeting for not standing up to Karen sooner. By the end of the month, 3 out of 5 board members had stepped down, leaving Karen increasingly isolated. But Karen wasn't done fighting, not yet. She hired a high-powered attorney and filed a countersuit against Mark Harper for defamation, claiming his public statements about her were damaging her reputation. It was a desperate move, and one that quickly backfired when Denise Carter filed a motion to dismiss based on anti-SLAPP laws designed to protect individuals from frivolous lawsuits intended to silence them. The judge not only dismissed Karen's countersuit but also ordered her to pay Mark's legal fees related to the motion. A small but satisfying victory for Mark and Denise. Meanwhile, depositions for the wrongful death lawsuit were underway, and Karen found herself in the hot seat. During her deposition, Denise grilled her relentlessly about her decisions on the night Daniel Harper died. "Ms. Mitchell," Denise began, her tone sharp but controlled, "can you explain why you chose to enforce Bylaw 18D instead of allowing paramedics through the gate?" Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I was following protocol," she said defensively. "And who created that protocol?" Denise asked. Karen hesitated before answering. "The board approved it. Under your recommendation," Denise pressed. Karen nodded reluctantly. Denise leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "So you're telling this court that you prioritized enforcing an outdated bylaw over saving someone's life?" Karen opened her mouth to respond but faltered under Denise's piercing gaze. I didn't think it would take that long," she stammered. Denise didn't let up. She presented emails where Karen explicitly instructed gate attendants not to allow any vehicles through without prior authorization, even emergency vehicles, unless there was visible fire or smoke. "Do these emails reflect your understanding of protocol?" Denise asked as she handed copies of the emails to Karen and opposing counsel. Karen's face turned pale as she read through them silently. The deposition ended with Karen visibly shaken, a stark contrast to the confident, authoritative figure she once projected at HOA meetings. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during a community meeting held shortly after depositions concluded. By this point, public opinion in Maplewood Estates had swung overwhelmingly against Karen. Residents packed into the clubhouse meeting room, spilling out into the hallway as they demanded answers from their beleaguered HOA president. Karen tried to maintain control of the meeting but was quickly shouted down by angry homeowners demanding her resignation. "You've ruined this community," one man yelled from the back of the room. "My mother couldn't get her medication because of you," another woman shouted. Finally, after nearly an hour of heated exchanges. Karen stood up from her seat at the front of the room and announced through gritted teeth, "Fine, I resign." The room erupted into cheers and applause as Karen stormed out, slamming the door behind her. In the days that followed, Maplewood Estates began picking up the pieces left behind by Karen's disastrous tenure as HOA president. The city appointed an interim manager to oversee operations while residents worked on electing a new board, one committed to transparency and accountability. As for Karen, she retreated into relative obscurity after losing both her position and much of her credibility within the community and beyond. Her koi pond remained pristine, but empty, a quiet reminder of what happens when power is abused in pursuit of personal gain rather than serving those entrusted to your care. The courtroom was packed. Residents from Maplewood Estates, reporters, and curious onlookers filled every seat, their eyes glued to Karen Mitchell as she sat at the defendant's table. Gone was the confident, clipboard-wielding HOA president who had once ruled the community with an iron fist. In her place sat a woman visibly worn down by months of public scrutiny, legal battles, and the weight of her own decisions. Mark Harper sat across the room, his hands folded neatly on the table in front of him. Beside him was Denise Carter, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk surveying its prey. The trial had been long and grueling, but today was the day it would all come to an end. The judge entered, and everyone rose. After what felt like an eternity of procedural formalities, it was time for closing arguments. Denise stood and walked to the center of the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, addressing the jury with a measured tone that commanded attention. "This case is not just about Daniel Harper's tragic death. It's about accountability. It's about what happens when power is abused and bureaucracy is weaponized against the very people it's supposed to serve." She turned toward Karen, who avoided her gaze. The defendant had a choice on that fateful night. She could have opened the gate and allowed paramedics to save a man's life. Instead, she chose to enforce an outdated bylaw, one she herself manipulated to consolidate her control over this community. Denise walked back toward the jury box, her voice growing more impassioned. "Rules are important. We all know that. But when rules are used to harm rather than help, when they're used as a shield for negligence and cruelty, they cease to be rules worth following." She paused for effect, letting her words sink in before delivering her final statement. "Today, you have the power to send a message, not just to Karen Mitchell, but to every person in a position of authority who thinks they're above accountability. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about ensuring that what happened to Daniel Harper never happens again." When Denise finished, there wasn't a sound in the courtroom except for the faint rustle of papers as she returned to her seat. Karen's attorney gave his closing argument next, but it lacked conviction. The evidence against Karen was overwhelming, and even he seemed resigned to the inevitable outcome. After deliberating for just under 2 hours, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts of negligence and wrongful death. The court awarded Mark Harper and his family significant damages, not just from Karen personally, but also from the dissolved HOA's remaining assets. Karen sat frozen as the verdict was read aloud, her face pale and expressionless. For Mark, it wasn't about the money, it never had been. It was about justice for his father and for every resident who had suffered under Karen's rule. But justice didn't stop at the courtroom door. In addition to losing the lawsuit, Karen faced further consequences from local authorities. The city filed additional charges against her for obstructing emergency services and violating safety regulations. Her personal assets, her house, her car, even her beloved koi pond, were liquidated to pay off mounting legal fees and damages. And then came perhaps the sweetest irony of all. With Karen removed from power and the HOA officially dissolved, Maplewood Estates needed someone to step in and manage day-to-day operations while residents worked on forming a new board. The city appointed an interim manager, retired firefighter Bill Carson. Bill had lived in Maplewood Estates years ago but had moved away after clashing with Karen over, you guessed it, a fine for leaving his trash cans out past 6 p.m. Now he was back, not as a resident but as someone tasked with cleaning up Karen's mess. Under Bill's leadership, changes came swiftly. The gate system was replaced with one that included an emergency override feature accessible to first responders. Sidewalks were repaired and brought up to ADA standards. And most importantly, residents were given a voice in how their community was run, a stark contrast to Karen's autocratic approach. For Mark Harper, watching these changes unfold felt like closure, not just for himself but for his entire family. One afternoon, he stood outside his parents' house, the same house where his father had collapsed that terrible night, and watched as workers dismantled the old gate that had caused so much pain. As they hauled away pieces of rusted metal and broken chains, Mark couldn't help but smile. Justice wasn't just served, it was poetic. In the weeks that followed, Mark became something of a local celebrity. People stopped him at grocery stores and gas stations to thank him for standing up to Karen Mitchell and fighting for what was right. He received letters from strangers across the country who shared their own HOA horror stories and told him how inspired they were by his courage. But Mark didn't see himself as a hero. "I just did what I had to do," he told one reporter during an interview. "This wasn't about me. It was about my dad." As life in Maplewood Estates slowly returned to normal, or perhaps found a new normal, Mark reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And while he knew his father would never walk through that front door again, he also knew Daniel Harper's legacy would live on, not just in his family but in every life touched by this story. So here's where we leave you, with one simple question. What would you do if you were in Mark Harper's shoes? Would you stand up against injustice? Would you fight back against those who abuse their power? Or would you let fear or apathy hold you back? If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own experiences or inspired you in some way, let us know. Like this post, share it with your friends, leave a comment below with your thoughts or your own HOA nightmare stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Because at the end of the day, stories like these remind us that even in our darkest moments, there's always hope, and sometimes even justice, with a side of irony thrown in for good measure.